the June 2022 audit, and rather than going through the 200-page report, we're going to talk about the supplement. The supplement is give or take 22 pages, 27 pages. I'm not going to hit all 27 pages. I've been asked to keep it to give or take 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to attempt to do so. I would like to point out it's not in your supplemental report, but in the big report, I'll call it, we did issue a clean opinion on the financial statements. That's the best opinion we can give as CPAs, is what you want to see. Now, moving into the supplemental report, we also had 19 findings. And you might say, wow, 19 findings, that's a lot. And I want to kind of break it down and make it more digestible. So, of the 19 findings, and if you want to read these, they're on pages 22 through 27 of the small supplemental report. 6 of the 19 are duplicate findings, meaning we had to write them twice, mainly for single audit purposes. So when you back those off, you get to really 13 original findings, I guess I'd call it. Of those 13 findings, 9 of them have been resolved as I stand here today. 4 of them we consider partially resolved. You might say, okay, well, what are those 4? One of them is what we call the school activity finding, your finding number 1. It's been there for many years. Progress has been made, but I can't stand here and say it's been resolved. It's going to be likely repeated next year. The other 3 pertain to documentation in personnel files, mainly regarding experience and education. That's the other 3. So, like I said, I started off with 19, but we get down to the 4 that are not fully resolved. We're standing here today. Not a bad situation considering what's in the report. So with that being said, about 22 through 27, any questions or comments regarding the findings? If there's no questions about the findings.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
So it looks like in 2019, in an effort to address this particular finding, we hired some additional bookkeepers. And you just said that we continue to make progress.
Yes, sir.
Is there some kind of quantifiable number that you attach to the word progress? Like how much more do we need to go to be in compliance at that level? Are we seeing multiple instances of bookkeeping, fundraising?
A little bit of a moving target there because you do have some turnover in staff. In 2022, I stood here and you guys hired, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 2 or 3 staff? 2 staff.
It says 4. 4 account clerks were hired in 2019.
But I was at 4 in 2019, and we hired another 2 in 2022.
Okay.
But I was standing here, I think it was in March last year or late February, so by the time these people were hired and came on board, they didn't really have an effect on my June 2022 audit. So I can't really speak to the progress that was made because of their hiring in 22, because it really is going to be in effect on the next audit in 23. Progress has been made, but Dr. Aguilar, as staff turn over at these schools, one school gets a lot better.
It'll happen.
And somebody leaves and another school takes a step back. So it's very difficult to stand here and say that by this amount of time or this quantifiable number, this finding will be resolved.
Okay.
Everything was static and you had static staff. I would say we're probably a couple of years away, but that's just not realistic to say that everybody's going to stay where they are. I don't know if I'm missing anything, Anthony or Mandy, if you have anything to add. Does that answer your question, Dr. Aguilar?
Yes, sir.
Any more questions about the findings?
No.
Okay, well, that being said, let's move to page 1, and we're going to cover on pages 1 through 8 the general fund operations, okay? Page 1 is the revenues, 2 through 8 are the expenditures. I am not going to hit every item. I'm going to hit the high points here. We'll move through this fairly rapidly. If somebody has a question, just interrupt me, and let's talk about it at that time. Just to kind of go over the format of these pages, because they're all the same on pages 1 through 8. Far left column is your final adopted budget. Next to that is your actual audited 2022 number, then your variance from your budget to your actual number, and the far right column is your 2021 actual audited number. I'm going to make some comparisons between actual 21 and actual 22. So we can look at the revenues. You have all the different parish sources listed out in front of you. Total parish sources revenues up from 163 million in 2021 to 172.7 million in 2022, talking about a $9 million increase there. The main reason for the increase is in sales tax. When you take a look, that was about 83 million in 21, increase about 92 million in 2022. That's pretty much the increase here. Looking at state sources, total state sources increased from 143 million approximately to 152 million, $9 million increase year over year. Look at the very first item listed here, State Public School Fund, up from 140 million to 149. That is the reason for the increase of this particular section. Total revenues, 2021 came in at a shade over 306 million. We increased about 18 million to 324 million in the current year, mainly for those two items I covered, your sales taxes and your state public school fund increase. Those are the two reasons for the increases in revenues. Any questions on the revenues? We're going to take the same approach. It's the exact same format. It increased to 118.8 million. Right above the total is the main reason for the increase, the allocation to charter schools. It was 15.9 million in 21, 19.3 million in 2022. That's the reason for your main reason for your increase here. Special education programs, 29 million both in 21 and 22. Moving on to page 3. Vocational education programs, 5.4 million in 21 and increased to 5.7 million in 2022. No big variances to speak of here. Other instructional programs, 7.9 million in 21 up to 8.5 million in 2022. Special programs, 5.2 million in 21 up to almost 6.9 million. You can see the salaries and benefits driving the increase in this section. On to page 4. Pupil support services, 19.5 million in 21 up to 20.1 million in 22. Not a big variance year over year. Instructional staff support services, literally almost the exact same number, 11.2 million in 21, 11,187,000 in 2022. Moving on to page 5. 2021 general administration, 7.5 million, decreased to 6.6 million. The main reason for the decrease is here you had less legal services and judgments in 2022 than you had in 2021. That's the reason for about a $900,000 decrease. Moving on to school administration, 19.8 million both in 21 and 22. Page 6. Business services, 2.9 million in 21, 3 million in 2022. Very little variance. Operation and maintenance of plant services, 28.5 million up to 29.7 million. So you talk about a $1.2 million increase there. Utilities, repairs and maintenance services, property insurance, they're toward the bottom third of this section. Those three line items are the main reason for the increase in this particular section. Moving on to page 7. Student transportation services, 17.2 million in 21 up to 18.4 million in 2022. Your fleet insurance, materials and supplies, gasoline, diesel, and employee benefits, these 4 or 5 items toward the bottom of this section are the main reasons for the increase from 21 to 22. Central services, 6.2 million in 21 down to 5.7 million in 2022. And then finally we conclude on page 8. Your total expenditures in the general fund in 2021, 276.9 million. In 2022, those expenditures increased by about $7 million to 284.1 million. So revenues increased about 18, expenditures about 7. So nice control over the expenditures and a healthy increase in the revenues. If we flip to page 9, we bring it all together. All we added to page 9 is we summarized pages 1 through 8 and added your original budget. So we've gone over the top, basically 2/3 of this page. Right toward the bottom third, you get above other financing sources, which is in all caps, you get excess of revenues over expenditures, okay? Last year you had a really good year with an excess of 29.7 million. I would say that's a really strong year for the school board. This year you did quite a bit better than that with an excess revenues exceeding expenditures of 40.7 million, about $11 million increase just in your general fund. Again, we talked about sales taxes increasing and other things, but nevertheless, this is an exceptional year. Mandy and I were talking before the presentation. It's one of the better years from a general fund standpoint since she's been doing the audit. And Mandy's been doing the audit quite a few years. You can see the next section is other financing sources, and of this 40 million, we do transfer out 36.8 million. Last year we transferred out 28 million. So even after we transfer out 36, we're still increasing our fund balance by about $4 million. And bottom line in your general fund, 68.1 million last year, up to $72.1 million this year. Very healthy fund balance in your general fund. Yes, sir.
Mr. Golder, can you I guess give us some detail on what that $36 million that we transfer out? Is that debt service?
Mandy, can you speak a little bit?
Most of it is for capital projects. 75% is to move out the excess that you had of that 40 million to put it into
And to kind of go along with Justin's question there, let's flip to page 10. And page 10 has a lot of breakdown of per pupil, both from both a revenue and expenditure standpoint. I don't really want to focus on that unless someone has a question. I'd like to go to the very bottom of the page. Your second to last line on them is net transfers out. And this kind of feeds into Justin's question that he just asked. You see net transfers out in 2022, 36.8 million. Last year, 28 million. Year before that, 24.9. Year before that, 14. So in the last 4 years, you've transferred out of the general fund approximately $104 million. And to Manny's answer to your question, about 75% of that is for capital expenditures, to actually build and purchase capital items within the parish. So we have the fund balance we need according to stabilization policy, and we're still transferring out this much money to improve the school system throughout the parish. So extremely healthy situation financially in the general fund. Any questions on page 10? Moving right along, 11 and 12 are comparisons from a revenue and expenditure standpoint between St. Tammany and Lafayette Parish. This is for your information. I'll answer any questions or talk about anything anyone wants, but I didn't have any intention here today to go over this in any detail. So let's move through pages 11 and 12. And then let's get to page 13. This is a different look at the expenditures. We saw 21 and 22 compared. On this, we're just looking at expenditures in general fund, but we add 19 and 20, and we can see a little bit more of a trend, not only from a dollar standpoint, but from a percentage standpoint. So looking at your personal services and related benefits, being salaries and employee benefits, look at the trend over 10 years. Back in 19, we were spending $212 million at this line item, representing about 81%, okay? So here in 2022, that number's increased only $10 million over 4 years, which to me is very reasonable, to $222 million, representing even less of a total percentage of your total expenditure in the general fund to about 78%. So I would say you have a nice control over your personnel services and related benefits within the general fund. Then we get to other expenditures, and you can see we have these broken out over different categories. The first is instructional materials and supplies. Looking at the total, it's actually coming down in dollar value and in percentage. Back in 19, we were at 3.3% or 8.8 million. This year in 2022, 7.6 million to 2.7. I would assume some of this is due to less textbooks being used and more electronic, so this would continue to go down over time, I would assume. Repairs and maintenance is look at this, it's at 8.5 million this year, 7.8 last year. We were at 6.8 back in 19. So it's ranging between about 2.5% and 3% over this 4-year span. Not a bad variation. You would expect this year to be up mainly because of fuel. And we all know we all pump gas into our cars and it's more expensive, or it was more expensive earlier in 2022. Utilities and telephone, it's increasing, but percentage-wise, you were back at 2.5% in 2019. We're at 2.7% in 2022. To me, very reasonable. Insurance, very similar to utilities. It is going up, but you're ranging from about 0.8 in 19. You're at 1%, so a slight increase every year. Contracted services, right at about 3% all 4 years, a little bit more than that some years. $9.1 value, 9.1 million this year versus 8.9 million last year. The big one really, and I hit on this earlier, is appropriation to charter schools. You can see back in 2019, this was a little under $13 million or 4.9%. Then we go to a shade over $13 million, right at 5, jumped to 15.9 last year, almost 6%. Now we're at 19.3 million this year, almost 7%. So you can see this is the one that's making the biggest dollar value and also percentage change in your general fund expenditures. And then you have other kind of a catch-all. Total expenditures back in 2019, 264 million. So over this 4-year span, you've only increased your general fund expenditures by $20 million. And when you think about the cost of things, especially in the past 12 to 18 months, to me it's very, very reasonable to have this amount of increase over a 4-year period. So good control over the expenditures. Any questions on page 13? Hearing none, let's keep on moving through. And we get to page 14. Page 14 is the group self-insurance fund. And there's really good news to report here. If you look at it, charges for services, your revenues, increased by about 3.7 million, from 60.4 million up to 64.1 million. So about $3.7 million increase. You might say, well, what caused the increase? Two major items caused the increase. You had about 1.2 million increase due to COVID reimbursements, okay? Then you had your Silver Script drug program in place for a full year. I think it first came online in January of 21, but your fiscal year that I'm talking about started in July of 21. So July of 21 to June of 22 is your first full fiscal year. That increased your revenues by 1.4 million. So these two items represent about 2.6, 2.7 million of the $3.7 million increase from 21 to 22. So you get a nice increase in the revenues, then we get to operating expenditures, and you can see these are very similar and down about $1 million. 61.5 million in 21, down to 60.5 million in 22, and that savings came in less claim payments. Those are down by virtually the exact amount of your total operating expenditures. And look at the change in your operating loss last year versus income this year. You lost at this line item 1.1 million in 21. This year you have an income of 3.6 million for a change of about 4.7 million between 2021 2022. So similar trend that we saw in the general fund, very healthy trend here, somewhat unexpected in my opinion, but good news in the self-insurance fund. I don't think there's any point in going over the rest of the page unless anyone has a question on it. Okay, with that being said, we can move on to page 15. And page 15 is to kind of summarize, you know, we talked about, or I talked about how good the general fund did in 2022, and you have your general fund budgeted expenditures of 302 million, and your stabilization policy is to have approximately 75 days or 20.8%. So you should have a fund balance in your general fund of at least, according to your policy, 62.9 million. As we saw earlier, you have a fund balance of a shade over 72 million. So you're well above where you're required to be according to your own policy. So overall, I would say the school board is in a very healthy situation, and the general fund in particular, we went over in detail today, is in good standing as well. My dad, a little bit of a side note, was having a conversation with some attorneys from Foley and Judell. So this is not necessarily, it's hearsay. My dad told me this, but Foley and Judell are some bonding attorneys, and they told him last week that Lafayette Parish School Board is the most creditworthy debt of any municipality in the state of Louisiana. I can't say that that's been validated. I'm repeating what some attorneys told my dad, but to me, Foley and Judell does a lot of work for a lot of our clients. We do a lot of government work. I thought it was worth mentioning today. I mean, if I was a school board member just in this parish as a citizen, I'm proud to say that, you know, the school system in our parish is the most creditworthy government entity to have debt. It has the best rating of any municipality in the state. Something to be proud of. I thought it was worth mentioning today. It's not in the report here. My dad told me this in a side, but I did want to mention it today. Any questions on anything I talked about regarding the findings, regarding the good news, regarding the financial situation, anything in this report? If there's none, I just would like to take the opportunity to thank this council and the parish for having us do the work. We really appreciate the business and look forward to continue to do the business with Lafayette Parish School Systems. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask the young lady sitting in the press row to write that down, that we're the most creditworthy taxing authority in the state of Louisiana. I believe I said the most creditworthy taxing authority in the state of Louisiana. Gospel truth. Sorry. Gospel truth.